Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of There's a Will. It's good to see you. May I say at the start of the show, please like or subscribe on YouTube now that we know each other better. I think the foreplay has gone on long enough. And on Facebook as well. There's a Will on YouTube. There's a Will. Put Richardsson just to get it quicker. And on Facebook, you'll find There's a Will. Here's someone who's subscribed to both the YouTube channel and the Facebook, so he gets a gold star.
Thank you very much.
Presentation at the end of the show, and that is Nicholas Richardson, who is urbane
kind of you to
and
say so.
Slightly insane. But both go together.
Well, I think it would be hard to be sane in today's world, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I know.
Being insane is a slight...
I feel I was looking in a mirror when I said that.
Slight defensive mechanism, yes.
Yeah, it's kind of like a protective armor, psychological armor, to be slightly mad. Yeah, it was Hunter S. Thompson who said, if you act a little crazy, then people will be very pleasantly surprised when you act normal.
Exactly. What is normal? I mean, you know...
Well, sane?
I was speaking once to a psychiatrist, and they said, well, there's really no normal. It's all a bit of, it's on a scale. They talk about psychopaths.
Yeah, sure.
So, but there's no sort of, everybody's a bit of one and a bit of the other, so to speak.
This is a very good, I should say, entendre, to our first subject, which is the Criminal Court, International Criminal Court, also known as the ICC.
The ICC, yes.
Yeah, convicting that extremely
to be fair, he hasn't been convicted yet. He's been. They've issued an international arrest warrant. Yeah,
an international arrest warrant
for that bringer of love, peace, and harmony, Mr. Putin.
Yeah, he's a lovely fellow.
He is. The funny thing is, sorry, the yesterday's man. I don't think he was only ever yesterday's half man anyway, Mr. I can never get his name right, Medvedev, has said anybody arresting him, they'll nuke whichever city he's in.
They're going to nuke the city where they have him.
Yeah, so he flies to Argentina, he's arrested, he's in a prison in Buenos Aires, and the madman in the Kremlin send a nuclear weapon to Buenos Aires, killing their president.
Killing the president.
Killing their own president, which actually shows the level of strategic thinking in the Kremlin. Actually, to be fair, he's not even a character now. I mean, he's hanging around here.
Medved?
Yeah,
he's just a mouth.
He's not even. Yeah, he's very
noises.
much a non-character even in the Kremlin. I understand.
He's a guy that you want to have about, just have a few minutes alone with him in a locked room, and just tell him a few home truths.
Yes, exactly.
Because that's a stuffed shirt if you've ever seen one. That guy.
Yes, but I mean, you raise an interesting point, of course, because Hungary have said that if Mr. Putin hops over to Budapest, they will not arrest him.
Now, is he going to Budapest?
No, but I mean, they've just...
He can't come to the EU, he'll be done.
Well, but the Hungarians said that even if he were to arrive, they would not arrest him.
They would not arrest him because somehow the Hungarians, Tucker Carlson's favorite collaborators in Europe, have all the countries to choose. I mean, even Poland doesn't get along, or the other Central European countries don't get along.
But there's a very long history of Polish-Hungarian cooperation.
I know, but they don't get along now. None of the other Central European countries are talking to them. It's, they went to the prom together, and Mr. Orban threw up all over his dress. So nobody's very happy with him now, are they?
No, they're not.
Yeah,
they're not.
Pretty disgusting chap too. So, but when you talk about psychopathy, we have to think in the light of this. This International Criminal Court, what you call it, a warrant, that maybe he's viewed as a criminal, psychopath.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean,
his behaviour is criminal.
Well, yeah, his behaviour is certainly criminal and very unpleasant. But
maybe he's not a psychopath.
But I don't think these people are necessarily mentally. I mean, clearly.
But you don't have to be mentally ill to be a psychopath.
No, you don't have to be mentally ill to be a psychopath.
I mean, not ostensibly.
No. But when people talk about him being a psychopath, they actually mean somebody who's mentally disturbed. They don't actually mean somebody who's emotionally so controlled that, they're kind to animals, but they hate human beings. And it's not that they hate humans, they just generally psychopaths have no feeling. So they murder people, and they don't feel that. It's not that they are they'd set out to be evil people. I mean, it's just one of those, they just don't have the same feeling.
But they do have the intention.
Well, they have the intention. Yes, he has the intention. No, he's a nasty piece of he's a nasty piece of work in that sense. I mean, you know, and the way.
It's so funny that the apologists, if I may,
well, you may, it's your show.
The Putin wing of the West, of the politically Putin wing, in the is it Putin or put in? I call him put in because he was.
He was put in. Yes.
Yeah, and that's always been to me, you know, the immediate.
I suppose we'd have to see it written in Cyrillic to decide how to pronounce it.
Immediate joke on his name. Yeah, exactly.
More Putin.
Yeah, but this Putin, I find a very annoying way to say his name. I don't know why. Well, it seems odd. It seems lazy. Yes,
of course. If you say it the right way, you can actually. The French will find it very amusing. Yeah, Mr. Putin.
Mr. Putin. Yeah. Right. Exactly. I thought about that as well.
Exactly.
And we won't go further with that. We won't. In case there are kids watching.
Exactly.
So, while Moscow's publicly dismissed the Hague's arrest order for Putin, I got this.
Well, I'd read actually the Moscow gone further. They've issued arrest warrants for all the judges of the International Criminal Court. I read
the Russians have.
Yes, I read in one publication.
Well, that's going to play well with a, you know, we're all shaking and cowering to an economy smaller than the state of Texas. So.
Well, we are, but unfortunately, it's an economy smaller than the state of Texas with a lot of nuclear weapons.
Well, yeah, imagine if Texas had nuclear weapons.
Well, goodness me.
Tell you what things might be a little calmer in the world.
Yeah, but you probably in Texas, if they had nuclear weapons, you'd probably be able to buy them in Walmart as well.
Do you think so?
Yeah.
Your own personal nuclear
you will
weapon?
Be able to.
That's next.
Yes.
Nuclear deterrence, home version.
In Walmart.
That's funny.
The right of every American to have a nuclear weapon in their backyard.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, exactly.
I tell you what, if everybody had a nuclear weapon, there'd be less chance of nuclear war, because everybody had one. Look, the thing that was interesting is this report that the widely available in the press, that his oligarch friends and other top-ranking officials are worried if they're going to be the next Goebbels or Himmler, because they're associating even their own dear leader with Hitler now.
You see, I think
the H word.
I mean, with the risk of sounding contrarian, I mean, I think they're not, because I don't think, unless I'm very much mistaken, they'll be in the same position. I don't think anybody is going to be marching in to Russia as they did into Germany at the end of the Second World War and rounding up these people. What's going to happen at some stage is some sort of...
We don't want to march into Russia.
Well, that's the whole point.
The game is not worth the candle.
Well, so the whole point is
they can't take care of the country themselves.
So these characters are not really facing that sort of Armageddon from their own point of view. I mean, if they try and get access to their yacht in Cannes or something, then they may.
Well, this is the problem.
They may, but most of them move their yachts from Cannes.
That's what they're talking about.
Yeah.
They don't care about... They're talking about dealing with the wider world if they leave Russia.
Well, of course.
And even if they disagree, what about those who secretly disagree and are being labeled as Putinites, which puts them next on the list?
Yeah, there is one character in London who probably falls in that category, whose name escapes me. But he's sort of living in house arrest in Highgate. It's a very big house, so it's not...
In Highgate?
In Highgate. He has
next to Mr. Marx.
No, he has one of the largest houses in London. It happens to be in Highgate.
Did you know that Karl Marx is buried in Highgate Cemetery?
Yes.
There's a big head.
So I think for many of these people, they think they are maybe going to be tarred with the same brush, and I suspect, given the way the Kremlin works, there's only really a very small number of people you could actually legitimately, if justice prevails, legitimately round up anyway.
There's some rumor going around. Yeah. I mean,
otherwise, this idea that somehow because you've won you can exact revenge on people is, winner's justice is not really justice at all.
Well, no, this is more like a Nuremberg type situation, or the thing that was done with some of the leaders in Serbia, because of the ethnic cleansing that they had overseen in various places, including Kosovo and the place in the middle. Good Lord, what's it called?
Bosnia.
Yes, Bosnia particularly.
Bosnia.
Yeah. And Kosovo. Well, anyway, I think we get to the bottom of this, but that's that particular item. Let's move on. The Wall Street Journal had an interesting article about something that we've talked about before on this program, which was Japan and Germany preparing for war. It's not a new subject for us, but I bet for a lot of people, that's sort of tickling their brain pan for the first time.
Yes.
What do you think about that?
Well, I think Germany, as part of NATO, Germany probably should. I mean, the German armed forces have been allowed to fall into a terrible state of disrepair, really. I mean, we complain about the British armed forces, but the ones that exist are relatively in good shape. I mean, they need more ammunition, etc., etc., etc. We need more of them. But in Germany, the case is just terrible. The whole...
Yeah.
And it's bureaucratic. You know, you want to order some helmets, and it takes 7 years to work its way through.
Have they been secretly rearming like
no,
the
they
Germans
haven't
in the
been.
30s? Because the Japanese have been rearming for some time, but on the quiet.
Yeah.
Under the auspices of the United States to counter China. They have been doing this for a while.
But of course, you would
new.
expect the Japanese to rearm, because if you see the Chinese trying to turn the South China Sea into a Chinese lake,
That's it.
occupying all these islands, some of which are disputed ownership, and sort of filling them full of concrete and putting military bases and listening posts and all sorts of things there, then it's only natural that Japan should rearm.
Plus, it's
and
an occupied
all
country.
these countries in the Pacific sort of region, sort of surrounding China. Well, they don't quite surround China, but that sort of arc of countries. Or the deal between the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia for the provision of nuclear submarines.
Yeah.
All part of this fact that something has changed, and that change, well, there were two changes. One, which is a sort of short-term change, which was Russia invading Ukraine. But two, the longer-term problem, which has been identified by many people, we've discussed it many times, the rise of China. And interestingly, not just the rise of China, which has been going on for a long, long time, but specifically now China's involvement in areas where you would not have expected them. And I'm thinking particularly in the last couple of weeks of the normalization of relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which was brokered by China, for example. That is China moving into the Middle East at a time when the European Union and the United States seem to have sort of turned their eye off the ball. Taken their eye off the ball. And this is part of China's... And the funny thing is, the tragedy in some ways for the West is, for want of a better term, is that China goes to Africa and builds a railway, okay? It extracts terrible financial price from the African country that allows it to build the railway. It flies in its own workers, it flies in their food, so the local Africans get nothing out of it. And the Chinese get something out of it, and the government ends up paying a lot of money for the privilege of having the Chinese build a railway. You or I go to Africa and build a railway free of charge under some development programme, and we employ local Africans to help build it, etc., but we're terrible colonialists. And we're bad.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And the whole thing we've allowed in the West...
China's allowed to be as colonial as they want, or the Russians are,
but they're much worse than any of the European
Why is that?
colonies.
Why does that attitude prevail,
Because the people who make decisions in politics, the elites in their countries, have been educated in our countries in many cases, and they've absorbed this grievance culture, so every problem can be blamed on colonialism. The fact that Zimbabwe, under the British and then under UDI, was a breadbasket exporting food to southern Africa and has now become an importer of food, an importer of charity with terrible inflation, is forgotten about.
We're getting off
we're getting slightly off the point.
Yeah, we are, because I want to talk more about I liked what you were saying about the strategy of Japan. I call those countries little aircraft carriers that go from Japan, Korea, well, it's on the land, but still, what do you call it? In Britain, you call it a RMS Mercury, for example, near Portsmouth is a
naval base.
It's a concrete. No. Yeah, but it's
concrete aircraft carrier.
Yeah, something like that. You call them in the British Navy. I forget. But anyway, they're kind of like that. Then you've got Taiwan. Then you've got the Philippines.
Well, all of these countries are obviously...
Indonesia.
Taiwan particularly,
Australia.
very worried about what the Chinese are going to do.
Yeah, what's interesting...
the Chinese have been quite open about it. We are taking Taiwan within our lifetimes, whether you like it or not.
Good luck. I'd like to see them...
Well...
I don't think they're up to doing the landing.
I mean, I realise that...
They can bomb the place.
The geography of Taiwan is particularly difficult for maritime landings, apparently.
Yeah, I don't see that. I mean, to do an Incheon...
But I do understand there is a certain amount of American disquiet at the sort of...
Are you aware of the Incheon landing in the Korean War?
Yeah.
By MacArthur? Yeah. That's what they'd have to do. That was a very, very difficult landing.
But the way the geography of Taiwan is, and the sea currents and the beaches and so on, it's all a bit it's very difficult to it wouldn't be like D-Day in Europe, for example.
I think we got Anthony.
We found Tony.
Okay, we're going to have Anthony
excellent.
McFarland Gonzalez join us for the last few minutes and be with us in the second half. Yeah, Anthony, are you there?
Sí, señor.
Hi,
oh, he's there.
Hola.
Hola.
Compadre. Amigo. Yeah, it's good to see you. You were just on your bicycle, I see.
Yeah, I was just doing the quick warm-up before the race tomorrow. So it's a 2.5-hour ride.
Yeah, where's the race tomorrow?
Legionovo.
Oh, you're going to be in Warsaw? Hmm? Okay, we'll talk about that after the show, or in the break, because we're coming up to the break soon. You recognize Nicholas Richardson. This is Anthony McFarland Gonzalez.
Hello, good sir and stranger.
Yeah.
Hi. Good to see you.
We're always glad to see you on the show.
We are.
Right, the clocks go forward today. It's Saturday, the last Saturday in March.
Yeah.
That's always a good thing. A little more light.
A little less sleep.
A little less sleep tonight, but a little more light generally for 6 months. So that's a good thing. That'll be good for your bicycling. You're not one of those fellows that gets up at 5:30, are you there, Anthony?
Guilty, actually.
Do you really?
Yeah.
You get up at 5:30?
Yep.
My goodness, that's the military enemy, see? You don't get up at 5:30.
6:30.
6:30. Yeah, I sleep late. I stay up late. That's not good.
Yeah, I'm trying to readjust because it's anyway getting more done in the day, unfortunately.
Yeah, I just get more done in the evening. That's the thing. But anyway, yeah, it's not necessarily a good deal. Now we're just finishing talking about Japan and Germany prepping for war. Maybe you have something you want to say about that.
Actually, that's kind of interesting that Japan and Germany are getting aligned. That's kind of an old axis of evil that was World War II reminiscent. But at the same time, China and Russia are doing the same ties that they did in World War II. It's just different sides of the party now.
China, the dominant party. I mean, the film or the clip of President Xi patting Putin on the head as he left, more or less, saying, "Be careful." I mean, hilarious.
I know.
Hilarious stuff.
Some people thought the headline when I posted our show from last week, saying that, talking about Putin visiting, I can't remember exactly what it was, but Xi visiting to Putin, and is China the biggest enemy? That's what it was. Is China the biggest enemy of Russia? And did Russia invade Ukraine to gain the respect of China? And some people thought that was an outlandish idea. But my God, there's been a series of articles this week saying exactly that.
I don't think they've really regained the respect of China, have they? I think they probably lost the respect of China.
Yeah.
Because they mucked it up, and then when you remember that historically,
he was doing it to get their
respect. A lot of
respect.
Chinese military work, as Tony will know much better than I, but a lot of the Chinese they sort of kind of followed Russian tactics, and they've been said completely useless. The fact that allegedly the Russians are now sending T-55 tanks or whatever.
We're going to come to that point.
We're going to go. I don't know.
We're going to come to that. Because
spoiler alert.
I think it says a lot. We can talk a lot about the state of the war by talking about that. So I don't want to tackle it yet.
No. Oh, sorry.
But we could talk in the last 2 or 3 minutes about this other article. Russians shocked by the realities of war. And there's a fellow who's got a YouTube channel, a fellow called Volodymyr Zolkin, Ukrainian, interviews Russian prisoners of war on his YouTube channel. And he told The Insider, which is on an online magazine, that there are some common themes among the captives are ignorance of what they're getting into, which is not really a surprise, is it?
No.
Because of the amount and the weight of the propaganda on the psyche from the Russian side. And then the regret once they're there for a number of reasons. I mean, obvious reasons, I suppose. The regret for the violence you're inflicting, regret for seeing people around you, including yourself, risk their lives, and you don't know why. Yeah.
Do they really regret it during the moment? Because if they really, truly, and utterly regret it, they wouldn't even have committed those crimes in the first place.
Well, I think you're talking about individual soldiers, and the officers' different position because they don't lead from the front. So that if the officers are sitting back observing this, they have perhaps more of a choice. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, sorry, I was just saying that the officers always lead from the rear with a gun pointed towards the people's backs to make them do.
This is why I was going to suggest the officers have more culpability and more blame than the soldiers do, because soldiers, once they're out there, they don't have much choice. It's either you go that way or there's a hole waiting for you over here.
Yeah, well, they do have a choice, Will. It's just that the fact that they don't do it.
What could they do?
They could literally take the weapons that they're given and then turn around and shoot the bastards. Literally.
That's an interesting concept. I'm wondering why that didn't happen, because it even happened in the trenches in the First World War. So there is an element, apparently, or we don't know about when it is happening, but there is an element of the lockstep or zombie-like behavior, as some Ukrainian soldiers have noted. Perhaps it's they're drugged, these people, the way they advance and advance and advance. Perhaps a bit like the Nazi soldiers were, we know, drugged in the Second World War.
Yeah.
So it's hard to know. It's hard to know. It is a question. You think that people could be revolted at a certain point by what the difference between what they've been told and what they see, the difference between they're told what their job is and what they're expected to do in reality.
Of course, yeah, badly trained, badly equipped.
And I don't know what the line is. You've been in the line, Anthony. Perhaps you can, from your experience, give us some idea of what goes through a soldier's mind, might go through their mind in a position like that. When they've received a bad order. I don't know that you have, but you can imagine what you might do in that situation.
Not to the brevity that these guys are facing, but yeah, it depends on the scenario, mate. Because when you're dealing with lives of kids or people that are innocent civilians, these guys have no moral compass. We're taught that we protect innocents and we look for the enemy that actually is going to engage you. Now, unfortunately, we've engaged kids that were brainwashed, that were shooting at us with actual weapons. So I'm sorry, buddy, but if you're of a fighting age and you have a weapon in your hand, you are shooting at me or my comrades, you're going to be shot and essentially neutralized. But these guys are just doing it to unarmed civilians.
Yeah, I think that's the difference. The ethos is, there are comparisons to people.
But the Russian army has always been barbaric. And look at the Second World War when it moved into Germany, towards the end of the war, and the horrors they inflicted on German civilians.
Well,
I mean, we can't say, well, Germany was...
I don't know if that's such a great example.
No, it's an example of Russian barbarism within the military.
Example, but I don't think it's the best example.
No, but it's a good example.
I'll tell you why. Because the Germans had invaded Russia first. Yeah. But I'll tell you what a great example is.
But they were still dealing with civilians.
May I help you?
Women and young girls.
Don't get defensive. May I help you?
You may help me.
And then you can run with it. I'm going to help you. I'm going to strengthen your argument.
Thank you.
The invasion of Poland by both the Germans and the Russians, one from the West, the Nazis, and the communists from the East in 1939.
Yes.
And I think that's a very good example of what you're talking about, of completely eradicating a country.
And why I think it's odd in the case of Ukraine is, of course, the propaganda was that the Ukrainians are our brothers and therefore we're liberating our brothers. And it seems a funny way of liberating your brothers by
actually... They were told that about Poles as well.
By actually slaughtering them, which is what happened in Iran, in Ukraine in certain places. I mean,
actually, they're also told, the Russians are told, we're just retaking our country.
Yeah.
These were our places. Crimea is all Russian since Catherine the Great took it when she was taking Poland,
well, of course,
eastern Poland as well.
It's very difficult, isn't it? I mean, it's easier for me because I come from an island, so our border has been fixed by Mother Nature in the dawn of time. But when you look at these things, where is the justice of where you draw borders? In fact. Because
well, that's what people agree.
Yes, exactly. And you raise a good point, which you didn't intend to raise, is there will come a point, at some point...
How do you know I didn't intend to raise it?
Because you didn't, because you will, where Russia and Ukraine and any other person who's in it will have to sit down and decide how we end this. And because since the complete defeat of Russia is out of the question, nobody is advocating invading Russia like we invaded Germany or at the end of the Second World War and going to Moscow and sticking a new flag on it and saying we've taken. Then, short of that, it means that you have to have some form of negotiation. And therefore, then the question about borders does become very relevant.
We're not going to be able to get to that point. I wish for negotiations because, unfortunately, the people that are in charge are almost identical to Putin once we take them out. But they're going to sacrifice their own people and hopefully never use the nuclear football. But we have a feeling that he will. And he's barbaric enough to do it.
Well, yes, of course. But my point is that the war has to end at some point. And we have to be prepared to how we're going to do that. Because short of actually going to Moscow and removing Putin and destroying the Russian military, which nobody is advocating, where is the point short of that? Which we can say, OK, job done. And this is, I think, it must be the great dilemma for all those who are more closely involved than you and I.
OK, I'll give you the last word there. We'll come back after this short commercial break. This is There's a Will, and we'll be back in 2 or 3 minutes.
We will.
Yeah, okay. Thanks for watching.
Deo Volente.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Before we continue, Nicholas has a book he wants to show you.
Yes, I've acquired this marvellous tome written by one Will Richardson.
Yeah, show that. Yeah, they can see it.
Yeah, they can see. You can see it. Yeah, it's a series of interviews done by Will. Very, very good stuff, in fact. I've dipped into it already, but I will dip into it further. Yeah. But I brought it along in the hope that Will might actually sign it later.
Yeah. Well, I'd be happy if you're pulling my leg, but I'd be happy to sign it. You're very kind. Now. It has interviews with some people. Well, all the people are eminent in their field, but some of them are
more eminent than others.
Well, they're names that you know. They're all eminent, but some of them are household names like Mike Tyson or Vladimir Klitschko.
Yes, exactly. Very topical.
And Rutger Hauer, one of the most famous
Guinness advert ever.
the most famous Hollander. The 20th century he was voted.
But I think largely for the films, but the Guinness adverts he did later in life.
Sadly gone. Sadly deceased. Lovely guy.
They're all going.
He was an amazing guy.
They're all
very down to earth. And several of those people died since I interviewed.
Well, you have that effect on people.
And one of them is very ill, Bruce Willis. So he's in there too.
It's odd how he's gone very. Well, we forget time flies very quickly, and people get older. And people who were adults when we were younger, of course, now we're adults ourselves.
No, we're in charge now.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is crazy.
But you think they're the same age they were when you were in your teens, and of course, by definition, they can't possibly be.
No, it's like if you haven't seen someone since school, and then you see a picture of them, it's a shock.
Yes, and it depends. Some age better than others. I went to
very few.
I went to a gathering in October in London of something we set up in my final year at Oxford. Some of us are just sort of dining society, thinking it'd just amuse us in our final year. Shocked to find it's actually still going strong. We had a sort of anniversary dinner in London, very, very pleasant. And some of the people who are my contemporaries, you pick up the conversation where you left it, decades ago. And they look exactly the same. Some look quite old, but a lot of them looked exactly the same.
But that's from college.
Yeah.
Little different than school. I said school.
Yeah.
School is very different, I think, than... but in university, you somewhat frame your character.
Yeah.
That's why you're there. If you're really doing it right, and when you're in school, you're pretty much unformed. I mean, Anthony, would you agree with that?
The university forms you? Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. And when you're at school, I mean, the idea of meeting people that I went to school with, to me, is really frightening to see them again, because we're so unformed. And then you miss that college part. I mean, I knew a couple of my friends, several of them, in college years, so that wouldn't be so shocking. But the difference is vast. So you would remember somebody when they're 16, or 15 or 17.
Yeah, it is frightening.
And then you would see them, and you hadn't seen them, and you still remember them that way. Totally unformed, you know?
Yeah.
And then you see them later, and God, they've changed, and you've changed. And sometimes you might find some common ground, but it's still kind of scary to me. College, there's more of a...
yeah, you're probably right, actually.
Of an affinity. I'm just saying, speaking on, I'm not trying to really win or be right, but
No.
I'm just saying what feels true to me about that situation. But at any rate, we need to go on with our subjects for the day.
We do have subjects.
Just the book, you can buy it on Amazon, freely available. Just my name. And
you've written more than one book.
On Amazon. Yeah, there's several books on Amazon, that's true. Thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, I will do. I like books and reading. I must do more. I must
I like writing them.
Less Netflix and more reading, I think, is required.
I don't really like writing them. It's painful, but I like it when it's done.
Yeah.
And all
I'd like to have written a book like you have.
Which one?
I haven't written it yet, but I would like to have the satisfaction of seeing
of having written a book.
Of having written a book and seeing it on the shelf in nice hard covers and giving copies to your friends and those sorts of things, which I imagine authors do.
When you go by the bookstore and you see it in the window.
But I've not had the inspiration yet.
Yeah. It's, I don't know, inspiration's only the beginning of it, and then you just have to sit there and finish it. You have to grind it out. But luckily with this one, they were all published in magazines.
Yeah.
So it's just a collection of stuff that already existed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And all of them were, in fact, published in Poland. Every single one of those stories.
Interesting.
Yeah. So they were published in Polish. And some of them published abroad in one form or another in various countries. Okay, that's enough of that. Now, so I wanted to talk about these 1940s tanks. There's a subject that Anthony can really get his
yes, please do.
Hands around, get his teeth into, right?
Sink in there, yes.
I know you want to talk about it. Why don't you lead off with the Russian 1940s era tanks that they've taken out of their storage.
Of the museum? Literally, that is no joke. They have literally started taking tanks from all over Russia and started retrofitting them with upgraded reactive armor, which is just an explosive little packet that you guys see, those little square blocks that you see on the T-72s and the T-80, the T-80s and the T-91s that they started pushing out, but pieces of shit. I mean, sorry, pardon my French. Piece of junk tanks. That means that the state of...
Pièce de merde.
Yes, pièce de merde, on all occasions. Actually, the Peugeot tanks in World War II are much better than some of these tanks, and that's not an understatement.
Is that right? Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, because the way that most of these tanks that were built back in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s is they were just riveted. They were not really welded on.
Yes.
They were pushed out as mass. So as they're being pushed out in mass, you sacrifice the armor plating that's supposed to be there to protect the crew. So basically, you're throwing a mechanized piece of equipment as cannon fodder as they were to do that same kind of battle tactics that they did in the Battle of St. Petersburg, where they were just throwing men with one of them had a rifle, the other one had the ammunition, and they both had to work together. And most of the time, people didn't. So, but anyways, these tanks are being taken out of the museum pieces, retrofitted as best they can in the Russian format, and pushed to the front lines. And it's absolutely disgusting. The Ukrainians are getting sick of it because they're just utterly destroying them even before they even get a chance to move.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder what both of you think. I had this thought that perhaps they're not even going to use these as tanks.
I think
they might use them as gun emplacements.
Yeah, but
because they can fire these old shells.
But they offer no protection for the crew. I know there's a British general.
Well, they dig them in.
Yeah, but a British general was interviewing. So these old tanks, they are a death trap if you're the crew, because a modern.
But not if they're buried under the ground.
Yeah, okay, if they're buried under the ground. But I mean, if they appear,
the Russians do that.
Yes, but if they appear anywhere, even with a soldier armed with a modern rifle would be able to pierce the metal. They're as bad as that.
Okay, then what's the purpose of using them?
The modern-day bullets that we use, especially the armor-piercing rounds, most of them will be able to penetrate some of these. If not, if you keep continuously firing the same spot or around the same spot, you'll get through there.
Well,
unlike modern-day battles,
you still haven't addressed the point that I'm making now, which I want to throw out there. I agree with you. I mean, And it seems absolutely beyond dispute that these tanks are not going to be very effective maneuvering in the open landscape for all the reasons you both just mentioned. But what if they're buried in the ground and they have shells that have a stockpile of these old shells? I don't know if they'd still be of any use, because these are tanks from post-1945, apparently. That's what they're saying.
They would have to bury the tank.
Because I saw them do this in the hills in Georgia. That's why I'm saying it.
What you saw in Georgia was they were digging the tanks to a certain berm where it's called turret defilade.
Yeah.
It's to allow the tank to still be able to move into its fighting position and then move back out.
Okay.
And then it can move to another position, which would be its B position, and then move back to another position, which would be its C position, and eventually moving between those three positions, or then shoot and moving in a different location. That's shoot, move, and communicate for typical tank tactics. That's what we would do on foot. We don't stay in one spot, because then you become a bigger target. Now, granted, the Russians have shown absolutely asinine tactics that don't make sense at all right now. So I wouldn't put it past.
And maybe bringing in these tanks is another example of asininity. But
well, probably an example of...
How can they use them effectively?
Well, they can't.
Fellas?
They can't.
I mean,
so why are they doing it?
They're doing it for two reasons, I suspect. One, because they don't have anything else, which is
exactly what it
and
is.
Two,
desperation.
Two, desperation. But three, probably it's this Russian mentality that bigger is better. So if they appear on a battlefield with 1,000 tanks, it's this idea of quantity, insufficient quantity, making up for lack of quality. But I think when it comes to tanks, that doesn't actually help them very much, for all the reasons Anthony has pointed out.
Okay, yeah, I buy that. So it's just foolish desperation.
Yeah, essentially, yes. I think that if they turn up with 1,000 tanks, that these poor Ukrainian soldiers won't be able to work out that these tanks are obsolete museum pieces, and they'll be sort of frightened.
So, okay, I agree. Okay, so let's put that to bed.
Propaganda.
It's propaganda. Let's put that to bed. Let's move on. Then, if the Russians have got so disorientated that they are resorting to this kind of, using obsolete equipment and to the point where it's totally ineffective, and even destructive of their own people to a greater extent than they've already shown with their tactics. How do you justify, if it's come to that point, how do these voices that are freely available on the internet, including people like Colonel McGregor, who was a weapons, who was involved in strategy for the invasion of Iraq 20 years ago, and others like him, gaining such popularity with the idea that Ukraine is losing. They're flipping statistics constantly, whereas we hear that the general point of view is that the Ukrainians are losing 1 man to 5 or 6. Maybe not that many, but they're losing a ratio much less than the Russians are. Where are these people getting the idea of flipping these statistics and then still calling themselves, one, truthful commentators, two, patriots
well,
of the West?
They're not telling the 100% truth at all, but they are touching the truth a bit, because the Ukrainian soldiers were losing them effective soldiers on the battlefield. We're losing effective soldiers that can actually pick up weapons, aim, and carry equipment across the battlefield. That's where we're losing that type of person, because they're being maimed. Just in Bakhmut, there is 100+ that they're losing a day because of injuries sustained, shots, you name it, whatever. Whether it just be gunshot wounds, whether it be artillery rounds, maiming, you name it, and dying on the battlefield because they can't get the medics in time, or the EMT services to get to them. Basically combat medics to get to them and bring them back to the military hospitals or hospitals that are...
Which is something you know about. You have expertise in doing that on the battlefield. Yeah.
Yes. So these guys are not entirely wrong. However, they are they're helping to fuel the propaganda that the Russians are doing. So I really need to smack those idiots on the top of the back of the head. Tell them, what are you doing? That's dumb. You tell the truth. They're running out of able-bodied individuals. That's the issue. And
but are they losing? Is it in fact the Ukrainians who are losing 5 or 6 to 1 Russian?
To one Ukrainian, 5 to 6 Russians.
Yeah, but these people, like this Colonel McGregor and other voices on the internet, which are, is quite extraordinary, are saying exactly the opposite. The opposite.
They need to go to the battlefield and go on the ground like we have.
But these are soldiers who've been.
Different soldiers that are in Iraq or Afghanistan, not ones that have actually been to the Ukraine, that have actually seen the front lines and actually fought with those soldiers to get the heck out. That's a whole different story, because they're not fighting. They were fighting unconventional warfare. The Iraqis put up a conventional fight for maybe 6 to 7 months.
Okay.
And then it became unconventional. Now they're fighting a conventional a conventional foe that is actually using non-conventional tactics with conventional equipment.
Well, okay, that makes total sense, of course. But my suggestion was that for some reason they just seem to be on the Russian side, and whether they're passive or active assets in that, or at least passive assets, and they're doing this famous sort of flipping everything. So they're saying that the Russians are going to win at Bakhmut, and they're surrounding and ready to, at any moment, to move through the lines. There's a lot of voices like that, and they're very compelling to ignorant people who don't know the things that you're saying about what the battlefield is, who don't even know where we are in Warsaw, much less where Ukraine is, who've never been to Europe, who've never read about European history, and they listen to these flunkies. They get a lot of hits on YouTube.
This is the problem.
And these guys are just lying.
This is the problem you alluded to earlier in a slightly different context about university forming people. I mean, the trouble is our modern universities now have become so captured by this weird anti-Western culture that the idea of sort of rational understanding of what you're reading or what you're watching and your ability to independently verify and consider, well, is this possible, is this right, has been depleted. We're so busy destroying our own culture that these strange characters of whom you speak are taken more seriously than they should be, because the people who are listening to them don't have the critical apparatus to reach a sensible conclusion. One of the issues which we could talk about, which would be quite sensible, is, again, what is the effect of Russia knowing that it is most unlikely that its border will be penetrated by Ukraine, having on its consideration of the future of the war, because all this support which Ukraine gets rightly from America, from other countries, from NATO as a whole, is all predicated on that. Yes, this is to defend Ukraine and maybe to allow Ukraine to counterattack within Ukraine, but the folk in the Kremlin can sit there thinking actually it's most unlikely, unless we do something really stupid, that meaningful military forces are going to invade Russia. There will be some sort of secret acts, no doubt, blowing up various airfields if they can get the special personnel in.
I don't think this is what.
No, but I mean, this must
be
a factor how this war is slightly different from other wars, because you have two people. Okay. You have two people going together, but it's not the question that Ukraine and Russia are at war, and Russia faces any prospect of Ukraine marching into Moscow.
Well, it's also different.
Similarly, Moscow probably hasn't had for a long time any prospect of marching into Kiev. So we have a strange war in that sense. Well,
you've got the stalemate that everybody talks
stalemate.
about.
We're almost like
a
First World War digging trenches and so forth.
Well, that's true. But
and so then it's a question of where does the war go next?
Well, I think the point that we don't know, but it either goes with Ukraine taking back more territory, or the Russians holding and maybe taking a little bit more on a certain sector, or making another foray, perhaps attacking to the rear of the Ukrainians by attacking from Belarus, for example, taking Moldavia and threatening the sort of Romanian side, or taking all of Moldavia.
Well, exactly.
Because there's no one there.
Belarus is the interesting one.
So attacking on the flanks is very much possible by the Russians. Don't you think, Tony, or not?
what I would do: envelop the enemy and surround them and cut off the supply chains, which is Romania, Moldova are the main supply chains right now, besides Poland.
Yep.
They can't attack Poland because they know that Poland would just literally, utterly take them to the grain, because they have one of the most modern armies in Europe, actually the strongest army in Europe right now as we speak. They cannot deploy globally, Poland, very well, but I say that with a grain of salt.
They could deploy with the help of their allies, as they did in Iraq and Afghanistan. Particularly special forces, right? You knew them there.
It seems that also, Belarus is not actually particularly keen, it seems to me, to help Russia very much. They are sending Russian troops to Belarus for training. But I think even Lukashenko can see that he'll have a pretty short career if he actually gets involved militarily.
Well, I don't think that you would. I mean, you raise a good point, and I agree with you. I don't think you would expect Belarus to get involved, but they might use their territory as they did before.
Yeah.
And what if they attacked both places at the same time? And they took Moldavia. They opened a second front, even trying to attack down to Rivne. We had the mayor of Rivne on. This is a problem, a threat that they have, and attacking down to Lviv. This would be doing what Antony's just suggested.
Yes, I mean, the problem is, of course, as we said, it seems that Russia is very short of armour. If they're using such old tanks, and we can assume if they're using old tanks, they're probably their field guns, and their mobile artillery is probably in a similar poor state.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure.
Exactly.
I'm not sure to what extent they could expect any support in terms of materiel from the Belarusian army.
Unless they kept some stuff back that we don't know about.
Belarusian, they're going to get it from China.
Yeah.
And that's where they're going to get it, because China, and that's the talks that they've had, the talks that Xi and Putin had, is most likely with military equipment that is being provided, and also supplies of the munitions, because they're running out of munitions. They literally are. They cannot keep up the factory building of it because they don't have the materials. China has the materials to build it, which is one of the reasons why they are able to. God, their tank force is ridiculous in its size, and they can spare those modern tanks, which can actually put up a fight to the Leopard 2s, or the Leopards that they're just giving to Ukrainians, and the infantry fighting vehicles, which they had, the Marauders and the Bradleys that are coming, and also the ARMs from, I think they're ARMs, but RC-10s from France.
Very good. Does this mean, I'll tell you an anecdote from the streets of Kiev, if I can get the word out, and that is a friend of the show, Patrick Patterson, who's a photographer living in Kiev, says the difference in the appearance of Chinese nationalists, mainland Chinese, on the streets of Kiev between January and now is huge. He says you see the Chinese everywhere. You did not see them as you're seeing them now. That's an interesting observation. My next question would be, would this mean if they're sending Chinese tanks and other equipment, would that mean the appearance of Chinese special forces or soldiers of some kind in Ukraine?
That doesn't mean that they're probably not operating there already. And
that's what my friend was suggesting, yeah.
That's the whole thing about these operatives that come from China. They're always in plain sight. They just mirror in and they blend in, just like the operatives that I mentioned a while ago in a couple shows that were caught here. There was 8 of them that were caught here in Poland. There was 6 of them that were caught in Germany, and there was another 12 or 13 that were caught in the U.S. Just cells. These are cells that have been operating in these countries for years. Yeah, but the Chinese, who knows how long they've been working there, these operatives, that they know that they're there, and that's one of the things that we know that they're there. It's just a matter of fact of trying to expose them in a way that we can still study them and find out as much information from them in order to gain the better advantage and see what the heck their plans are.
Good Lord. Well, I've got to cut us off there. You won't believe it, but we've only just got to first base. Haven't had time to bat in a run, and we've run out of time, unfortunately. So I would like to thank you, Nicholas, as always.
Always a pleasure.
It really is good to see you on the show, and we really do appreciate your contributions. They're always interesting and informative. And we respect your opinions. As well as Anthony McFarland Gonzalez, the same goes for you, sir. It's always glad to see you with your expertise and experience, not only in Afghanistan and Iraq and the special services, special forces, but also in what you're doing with regard to Ukraine. Thank you very much for being with us. And thank you, everybody, for watching the show. Please like and subscribe on YouTube. There's a Will Richardson to find the show very quickly. There's a Will on Facebook. Tell your friends. Send the show. There's no other show like this in Central Europe, totally focused on events that are happening here, with occasional forays into things like UFOs and other things when we have an interesting guest. But that, hey, the alien invasion is what's next, probably, folks. You got to admit. It's weird out there. To quote Karl von Clausewitz, the great German military theorist of the 19th century, we are in a realm of uncertainty. And to quote Rod Serling, that might be as strange a place as the Twilight Zone. Hello, everybody. I'm Will Richardson, and I want to invite you to watch There's a Will. That's my TV show, which talks about events in Central Europe, particularly related to the current unpleasantness in Ukraine, that is the war. Our shows are available on YouTube at There's a Will, and put Richardson in just to get there quicker because it's a new site. And also There's a Will on Facebook. That's There's a Will Richardson on YouTube, and There's a Will on Facebook. So please tell your friends, like and subscribe. See you next time.